Some of the greatest scientists and inventors are men whose names have become synonymous with their inventions. People like Nikola Tesla when it comes to alternating current, or Thomas Edison with the light bulb. But did you know there's another name out there that's just as deserving? A man who could very well be called the father of telecommunications. Alexander Graham Bell. But while he is credited with inventing the telephone, that was not his only invention. And in fact, many of his other creations might be even more important today than the telephone, especially for those of us living in Canada. Alexander Graham Bell was born in Edinburgh, Scotland in 1847, but moved to Canada at the age of 2 when his father, an English minister, accepted a position at the University of Edinburgh's sister institution, the University of Toronto. In fact, he spent most of his childhood in the capital city of Ontario. His mother was also a big influence on him, as she was one of the first women in the British Empire to attend university. And both of his parents had been strong advocates for education reform, which inspired him to become a teacher. But he wasn't your typical classroom teacher. You see, he had developed a keen interest in elocution, which was a popular teaching method during the 19th century. Elocution was all about improving public speaking skills through gestures, articulation, and vocal projection. But Bell soon realized there was an even greater need for elocution in his own life. When he was 12 years old, his younger brother, who had always struggled with speech, suddenly became almost entirely mute after contracting a severe case of scarlet fever. Though doctors were unable to cure the boy, young Alexander would never forget the impact this had on his family, and vowed to dedicate much of his life to helping others who suffered from speech impairments. And so, instead of attending university himself, he began traveling around the countryside, giving elocution lessons and working as an assistant to a doctor who was experimenting with teaching deaf-mutes to speak. It was here where he met a woman named Mabel Hubbard, daughter of a wealthy landowner. She was also working as a teacher for the deaf, and would go on to become Bell's wife and partner in both work and life. In 1867, Bell travelled to London to continue his studies in elocution, and began working with the Royal Institute for Deaf-Mutes. But his time across the pond would not last long. The following year, America's Centennial Exposition was being held in Philadelphia, and Bell decided to take part in the speaking exhibition. He didn't just want to wow audiences with his elocution. However, while in London, he had also taken up tinkering as a hobby. He worked alongside fellow scientists to develop a device that would transmit human speech via telegraph. After all, a telegram was simply text sent over an electric wire. So what if he could find a way to send written letters to represent spoken ones? As part of the exhibition, Bell and his assistant presented a demonstration of this new invention to a crowd of invited guests. Using a telegraph, they transmitted the now famous sentence, "Mr. Watson, come here, I want you." And thus the telephone was born. In fact, this first ever telephone call was made between Bell and his assistant, Thomas Watson, who was in an adjacent room. Unsurprisingly, news of this invention spread like wildfire, and Bell quickly found himself fielding offers from several American businessmen who wanted to invest in his creation. Ultimately, he would choose to partner with the Western Union Telegraph Company. Although the deal fell through after management discovered that one of its top executives had actually stolen the idea from an Italian inventor named Antonio Meucci. Fortunately, Bell still had another offer from a group of Boston businessmen, but they insisted that he move to the United States to manufacture and sell his product. And so, in 1870, he and his family left Canada for New England. While Bell had achieved his greatest dream by inventing the telephone, he certainly didn't rest on his laurels. Throughout his life, he continued to experiment with various technologies, including radio and phototelegraphy. In fact, he was even involved in the development of the first ever transatlantic telegraph cable. This was a project he shared with another famous scientist, Nikola Tesla. The two met for the first time in 1884 when Tesla came to work for Bell's company, the Bell Company, which had since been absorbed into American Telephone and Telegraph. Tesla, however, would not stay at the company for long, as he would later go on to join forces with George Westinghouse in order to develop an AC-powered distribution system. And we can probably thank this partnership for why so many countries, including the United States, use AC power today. But despite missing out on this groundbreaking invention, Bell still had plenty of success in the world of electrical engineering. In 1887, he invented the photophone, also known as the phototelephone or the light telephone. This was a communication system that used beams of light to transmit voice signals across a distance. In other words, it was essentially wireless communication. It was never very practical though, because the beam of light required a clear line of sight and could easily be disrupted by foliage, rain, fog, or even a building shadow. But that didn't stop Bell from trying to improve upon his invention. Over the years, he experimented with different methods of transmitting multiple signals simultaneously, as well as ways to make the signals more secure. And in 1908, he patented the mirror photophone, which allowed messages to be sent by reflecting a beam of light off mirrors. Unfortunately, this proved to be too complicated a process and was never widely adopted. But the principles behind the photophone are still used in fiber optic cables today, which are capable of transmitting large amounts of data over long distances. In fact, modern fiber optics owe much of their existence to Bell's invention and experiments. Another technology Bell helped pioneer was radio. In 1895, Bell filed a patent for a device he called a teletow, which was a type of radio transmitter. His idea consisted of a coherer and a transmitter that emitted electromagnetic waves, very similar to the radio waves used in modern-day radios. Although Bell didn't invent radio as a whole, his invention of the transmitter was a significant contribution to the field. One final area of study Bell devoted considerable time and energy to was aviation. He was fascinated by the idea of flight and saw it as the next great frontier for humanity. In 1909, he became a member of the Aero Club of America and served as chairman of its technical committee. He was also one of the founders of the National Advisory Council for Aeronautics, which later became NASA. And perhaps most famously, he provided financial backing for the Wright brothers in their efforts to build the world's first successful airplane. Without his investment, it's doubtful that their historic first flight would have ever happened. So why isn't Bell better known for these other inventions? Well, for starters, some of them weren't commercially successful. The photophone and radio were decades ahead of their time and didn't really catch on until long after Bell's death. Others, like his work with the telephone, were co-invented with other people. For example, he shared the Nobel Physics Prize for his invention of the telephone with his assistant, Thomas Watson. And then there are inventions like the airplane, which he didn't technically invent himself, but supported financially and otherwise. And of course, it doesn't help that some of his most famous inventions, like the photophone and radio, were overshadowed by the telephone, which quite literally changed the world. Nevertheless, Alexander Graham Bell's contributions to science, technology, and education should not be forgotten. He was a true polymath who helped shape the modern world in countless ways. And though he may not have been the richest or most famous person of his time, his legacy lives on through the countless lives he touched and the innovations he left behind. So, what do you think? Did you know about Alexander Graham Bell's many inventions? Which invention of his is most fascinating to you? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this one.